I beg you to try it, Patricia.
Let me get this straight, Carla. You disagree on the weapon, you disagree on the number of blows.
Listen to me, Patricia. You dare once in your life.
Hey people, Trish Wood here, and we have an extraordinary offering for you today. One of the best shows we've ever done, I think, and certainly one of the most important. We are going to be speaking to a young chap named Richie Herron. Richie Herron is what in the current parlance is called a detransitioner, which means that he was a male who transitioned to female, realized he'd made a mistake, and has transitioned back as much as you can when you've had your genitals removed by the NHS. In gender surgery, what they call bottom surgery. That's the cozy name, bottom surgery. What you're going to hear from Richie today is, I think it's going to blow your mind. It blew mine. Here's how I found him. He has a pretty nice Twitter timeline. And I don't know how he ended up in my timeline, but there he was one day doing a thread on what actually happens when you have your genitals removed and reconfigured in order to try to turn a male into a female, which of course you can't do, but you can't even really do a good facsimile. At least it didn't work out that well for Richie. So I thought you should hear what he is brave enough to actually describe and talk about, and it is a horror show. We must face this, people. We must face the idea that with this very, very strong connection to many of the mistakes made by science and medicine and media during the COVID crisis, which everybody who listens to this show understands very well. We sat around for 2.5 years saying, how can they be so dumb? Why are they proceeding with this given that it's hurting so many people? Why are they proceeding with talking points and mantras that don't actually address any of the data that we're reading that says this is not good, right? The expert class failed massively on COVID-19, and the connection to trans ideology is exactly the same. Medicine, psychiatry, psychology are failing these people. It has become a cult. Once you are involved in this, once you are a train, you are going through the tunnel. There's no way to stop it. He used a wonderful phrase in the interview that I will repeat to you, and that gave me chills. He said, while he was going through the psychological process that precipitated his sex reassignment surgery, that all doubts he had were managed by the people he was seeing on the way to surgery. All doubts were managed. Not all doubts were explored. All doubts were managed. So the assumption is that anybody who has some issue around their gender is trans. That's how it is treated these days. And unfortunately for Richie, who I believe is 35, this happened when he was 25, he wasn't a kid. He is autistic. He had a substance abuse problem, which I fully understand as I had one myself. As you know, I've been in recovery for 22 years now. And he had OCD. So all of those things were bedeviling him psychiatrically, and he's gay. So instead of saying this is a troubled gay man, they transitioned him. He had this surgery, and what he describes, what he felt like after it happened, what he has been left with, the deficits that he has now as a man, as a person, about going to the washroom, about genitalia. These are not small things, man. These are big things that he's got to live with for the rest of his life, and there's no way back for him. I will also say about Richie Herron, he, in the short time we talked, well, it wasn't short, but it was a couple of hours, but I got the sense he's a really decent guy, and he's sticking his neck out because he wants people to fully understand what's going on here. He's not denying that there are people, a very small number of people, who are born thinking that they are in the wrong body. That's gender dysphoria. That happens. But that's not what's going on here. This is a cult. This is an ideology. And they've come for the children, which we are going to talk about in a minute. But we can't, even if this is not a subject you're interested in because you don't know anybody who's trans or you don't have any kids in school being fed this garbage, understand this is a failure of our institutions, including legacy media, that absolutely reflects what happened during COVID. It is a failure. Media doesn't ask. They should be keeping these doctors and hospitals that are doing this honest by asking hard questions, but they're so wanting to be woke and cool that they support the ideology no matter who is paying the price for it. And you can't reach them. You cannot reach them. It's like Scientology. You can't, the reporters in some cases are as bad as the activists who will not brook any debate. And you know what they call people who argue with them, especially if they're women in my age, we're called TERFs, right? Trans, exclusionary, radical feminists or something, because we're calling BS on all the people that are being told that they are trans when they obviously have other things going on. So Richie Herron is coming up, but also with Ritchie Herron, this is a brilliant doubleheader today. Helen Joyce, who used to be an editor at The Economist, one of the most august news magazines in the world. So she's a serious person and a serious journalist, has written a tour de force, an extraordinary book called Trans. And she follows the history of the surgery and the way it's been treated as a psychological issue, etc. It's amazing what she says. And it's like she's gone down the rabbit hole and come out the other end. And she has some really, really interesting things to say about how dangerous this is. It's just dangerous. And we have to call out these things that are dangerous. It's like the emperor's new clothes. We cannot be afraid. I wrote a piece for my Substack called We're Living the Fall of Rome. If you haven't read it, go there. Because I know that you people know, because you're intuitive and smart and thinking critically, that this is not normal. Having children go to drag shows and feed drag queens dressed as strippers, feed them money, is not normal. It's not healthy and it's not good. The sexualizing of children is not good. We know that is not normal. People are afraid to speak out because they don't want to be called a transphobe. Get over it, right? We just have to speak the truth. This is the fall of Rome when they're coming for our children. When people like Max Boot, the Washington Post, he's a national security advisor, former Republican, now Democrat. He wrote a piece a couple of weeks ago where he bragged about taking his stepkids to a drag show. He did. He bragged about it. So something is really, really wrong. And you are going to hear how wrong it is when we get to the interview with Helen Joyce and Ritchie Herron. They're two extraordinary people. They're both brave and taking a lot of chances. And Richie Herron's story feels kind of like a horror movie when you hear what actually happened to him. So please stick around and listen to that. I want to talk to you a little bit about our funding, as I do every week. So I would be very, very grateful if you would consider helping to support this show with a small revolving monthly donation so we don't have to worry about it. Maybe the price of a good Starbucks, about $5 if that's what they are. And you can do it if you go to my website, which is trishwoodpodcast.com. There's a support button, and it will take you to either PayPal or Patreon. And also, I have a Substack called Trish Wood is Critical Substack. So my preferred method for y'all is to go to Substack because it's a free speech platform and I like to support that. We're transitioning away. So, for instance, if your Patreon comes up for renewal, renew it over at the Substack. That would be wonderful for us. Thank you. Because I don't have to worry about watching my P's and Q's with Substack, right? They don't deplatform people. This is a show that would get, I don't think we could put this show on YouTube. I don't think we could pull it down, right? Despite the fact that Richie is an eyewitness that it actually happened to, and Helen is a credentialed journalist, they probably, well, maybe they would run. I don't know, but I know they were pulling this stuff down for a while. So being funded this way, self-funded through listeners, also means that I don't have to really worry about curating advertisements. I think we may run some at some point, but I can't be impeded journalistically by the wants and needs of an advertiser. If we get some advertising at some point, they will not be people who can influence editorially what we are doing here. So please do consider that. Now, I have to talk to you about 2 events I'm doing, and the events are, the first one is the Ideas Institute presents The Soapbox. What's all this about rights? A Socratic conversation about COVID-19, courts, and the Constitution. Special guest speaker, Bruce Pardy, member of the Ideas Institute Board of Scholars and a professor of law at Queen's University. And I've had him on the show. He's totally brilliant. And he's going to be introduced by me. So if you come there, we can talk face to face. That is on Sunday, October 23rd, 2022. 3 to 6 p.m. Includes a Q&A. That's where the fun stuff gets done. You can ask questions. And the location is Irv at the George Gastro Pub, 236 Main Street South in Newmarket. And you can buy tickets by, how can you buy tickets? I guess you go to the Ideas Institute website and you can buy tickets, which are $50. Early bird until September 30th is $50. So please do that. I would love, love, love to see you there. I always love seeing people. And the other one I'm doing just shortly after that, I'm a busy little bee, is the Free Speech in Medicine 2022. The great Chris Milburn, Dr. Chris Milburn is behind that. You will have heard him on my Kai Matthews show because he stuck his neck out and called out that terrible, terrible event at a hospital in Nova Scotia where Kai Matthews died of meningitis because the hospital was so focused on COVID, they turned him away 3 times from emergency. Imagine that. And then he died of meningitis. Oh, just a brutal story. But Chris spoke up about it. Love that. Anyway, Free Speech in Medicine 2022 conference is now open for pre-registration. Will be held October 26th to 30th in Bedeque, Nova Scotia. Go to freespeechinmedicine.com. Guess who's flying up there? Well, Bruce Pardy's going to be there, so that's fun. But guess who's flying up there to do it? Our old friend Jay Bhattacharya, who is a magnificent, magnificent human being. So at the end of the show today, I'm going to have 2 funny little updates. One of them is apparently Denmark is dumping COVID vaccinations for almost everyone under 50. Why aren't we doing that? Wasn't Denmark the place that all the liberals wanted to live until COVID, right? And now we're just sort of going our own way, and we're going the wrong way. So I'll read you a little bit about that. Pierre Poilievre, head of the Conservative Party, kind of a meltdown, pretty funny. I will play a piece of tape of his first. He appeared at the podium to give a little speech and was heckled by a reporter from Global News. And it was so rude. I mean, seriously. Look, I was the toughest gal in town. I was doing jump interviews, jumping out of potted palms at unsuspecting politicians. It was just like ridiculous, doing all sorts of aggressive stuff. That's what we do. This guy was interrupting what was this kind of inaugural speech for Poilievre, who said he was going to take questions later. Anyway, the hostility from this global reporter it says everything, doesn't it, people? We know it's true, and they're going to go after Poilievre. with everything they have, and the liberals are going to start some kind of a Trumpian smear campaign against him. Right? They're already calling him Trump, but they're going to come up with, they'll say he's a Russian agent or something. I mean, they just will, because they cannot win on ideas. They cannot do it. So that's what's going to happen. But anyway, I'll play you the tape, and I'll also report what else happened. There was a bit of this reporter, whose name is David Aiken, also used the F word. And isn't that what happened to Chrystia Freeland? And all these same people went mental, national nervous breakdown. Oh, our discourse is terrible, and everybody on the right is against our poor politicians who are so fragile. That's what happened. But it's perfectly okay for the liberal media, or the legacy media, I guess I should call them, to attack Pierre Poilievre in the rudest possible way. We've got to restore discourse. I don't like the swearing at politicians, by the way. I don't like the guy who yelled at Chrystia Freeland. He shouldn't have done that. The F word was unnecessary. But as I've said before, they need to figure out why everybody's so mad instead of running around talking about how persecuted they are. I have never seen a bunch of people who are more pearl clutching than the legacy media and liberal politicians right now. They're all, someone says something bad and they just completely freak out, and it's like a January 6th moment. It's ridiculous. Anyway, we'll talk about that at the end of the show. And now we are going to move on to our interview with Ritchie Herron and Helen Joyce, both in the UK. She, I believe, is in Cambridge. He is in the north. They both have kind of Irish lilt accents, too, which is pretty fun. But they're going to talk about the Tavistock Clinic. You'll hear that mentioned. That was an English clinic that serviced young people, kids who were transitioning. And I will tell you something, they were shut right down based on a report that was written about the damage that they were doing. They were shut down. So, the UK is having some luck with rational thinking, although not quite, because we did see recently some lesbians removed from a gay pride parade because the trans people there didn't want them there. Imagine that. It's true. Anyway, so we're going to be talking about the Tavistock Clinic, just to give you an update on that. And it does seem like the UK is a bit ahead of us. They're starting to really question this stuff. Here in Canada and in the States, they're just dug right in. Trans extremists are running the show. They're writing policy. They're giving talking points. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous, but it can't last. This is too dangerous, and I hope that we can calm it down before too many kids are damaged by it. And at the end of the day, maybe it will be the medical malpractice insurers who shut it down when these kids wake up at the age of 25 and say, what the hell have I done? The other thing you need to know about Canada, and I believe this law either has been or is about to be passed in America, is this. And this is key to how utterly psychotic the policies are. In Canada, if a young person, or I believe any person, goes to a psychiatrist claiming that they have some gendery type issues going on, this therapist must affirm the gender claims. They can't look to see if it's borderline personality. They can't look to see if they're alcoholic and have other issues. They can't look to see if that, whatever. They can't, they're prevented. They're prevented from that. They must affirm the gender that the person, especially the kids, are saying. So if a girl goes in and says, I feel like a boy, that's it. There's no other examination and investigation allowed. It's over. You have to get them into what they call gender affirming care. It's one of those phrases that makes you want to put a gun in your mouth. Gender affirming care. So kids are diagnosing themselves under enormous societal pressure. Social contagion is the phrase. Abigail Schreier wrote about it brilliantly. That's happening, people. It's happening. And then they're going in and they're being mutilated by these surgeons. So we need to talk about this. This is another element of our expert class getting something totally wrong and totally upside down. Yes, there are trans people who need our love and care, but this is out of control. And this is not practicing medicine, and this is not helpful psychotherapy. So joining me now is Helen Joyce, who I just explained and described who she is and what she's written, and Richie Herron, who is, I guess the phrase now is detransitioning, and wrote an absolutely harrowing account of what happened to him on Twitter that really grabbed my attention. And I reached out in the DMs, and you responded very quickly, and I'm so glad you're here. You were very open and frank about medically about what this means, and I think that's important because the language used kind of obscures the reality of the knife, doesn't it? Top surgery, bottom surgery, it's like not, it doesn't really explain how deeply physically changed you are. So before I get to that, let me just get a bit of background about you, Richie. So how do you identify now? What do you think you are now? And I guess what you actually were all the time, but at some point you were confused.
Hello, Trish, first of all, and thanks for having me on. And it's great to see Helen too. I don't identify as anything. I am male. I always have been male. I'm a male that took estrogen and a male that had a very invasive surgery, and I'm a male that changed their name. That's what I am. As you said before, the lies live within the language. So I never went from male to female back to male. I was always male. So this is why I'm reluctant to use terms like MTF to M or MTF, because that in itself donates that you can change your sex from male to female and back again, whereas the reality is you can't change your sex. To just give a brief background of my scenario, I transitioned as an adult. I was over the age of 25. I was actually 26 when I started medical transition. I had surgery to what they would call bottom surgery, which again is a lie that lives within the language. It was a penile inversion with scrotal graft. So what they do is they remove your testicles. They literally remove the skin off the penis. Then they remove other parts, drill a hole into your pelvis as deep as they can go. And then they took it all in and moved the prostate so you can actually have sensation, because that's the thing that gives most people an orgasm post-surgery. Very few have clitoral sort of, or the neoclitoral sensation. And after surgery, I lost a lot of blood. I had a lot of urinary issues, and I still do. I'm on schedule to get a urethral dilation, which is something I'm going to need every 2 to 4 years, because gradually over time I get urethral constriction, which basically, if you imagine bending a straw and trying to get the liquid out of it, you can't when you bend a straw. You need to be straight, and that's essentially what's happening to me. And that means that I've got very weak bladder control. I've got a lot of issues with just using the toilet generally. I can get random shooting bits of pain. It is a really, really it's a very, very hard existence to deal with this and to come to the terms of the fact that this is it for life. And people are like, oh, just go get yourself a phalloplasty. And I'm like, that is the next level of Frankenstein butchery that I'm not even going to go down. This is it now, you know?
So let me just, what does that mean, a phalloplasty? Because I think probably a lot of my listeners don't know what that means. So just kind of speak to us as if we know nothing about the subject.
This is to take what a typical female anatomy, so what happens when a female takes testosterone is the clitoris might extend a little bit. Some get, it goes a few inches, some not much at all. But after a certain amount of time, they'll use that to create an artificial penis with the skin of either their arm or their thighs. And this is done not in one surgery, but in several stages. So the first thing they do is they need to create the phallus. So they need to take the skin off the arm or the thigh or leg or wherever. And this isn't just a little bit, this is a large section of skin. That in itself can lead to wound infection, because you literally like, you need to look at this. If anyone's listening, you need to look up these pictures. Do not look away. Do not look away. You have to see it. And that's what's going to wake everyone up when they see what this actually looks like.
Well, what do you mean by that, Richie? Just sort of, if you could just sort of paint a picture of what they would see if they...
Imagine seeing an arm without skin, and you can see the exposed muscles, and you can even see the bone, and sometimes it's literally nearly hanging off, and it is really, really horrible to look at. It's destructive.
And they take that skin, do they, to create a penis? Is that what they're doing with it?
So what they do is they create this tube first, essentially, and then latch it on. And again, they don't always get the position right. Sometimes it's too high, and that looks totally odd. And there's, I think it's like a 36% like necrosis rate on the phallus that is created out of skin. You're on anti-rejection meds for the rest of your life as well, because of the type of surgery that is, because you're literally attaching something. The human body can deal a lot better with something being taken away than it can adding to it, you know? So, and then after that, and I'm not sure if it was before or during or after, but then they extend the urethral passage to create the urinary tract under another surgery. And then they close up the vagina if that person wants it. Some people prefer to have both. I don't like explaining this in full because it's so brutal and grotesque.
It is brutal. It is grotesque.
And it comes in like 7 surgeries, I think it is. Whereas when I had surgery, it was in 1 surgery. But historically, that used to be done in stages 2. Right. They are getting refined in their sexual lobotomies, shall we say, because I refuse to call them plastic surgeries.
Let me ask you this, Richie, and then I'm going to go to Helen. I think the best way is maybe we'll just go back and forth. And I also think you two should talk to each other if you so choose. You know, I don't have to. I'll lead, but if you guys want to interact, that's fine.
Yeah, I would love
to. Were you prepared by anybody in the prelude to these, which sounds like super invasive surgeries? Were you prepared by anybody for what was going to actually happen? And were you prepared for what your life was going to be like after you had it done?
Not in this way, no. They basically, I need to be careful to say because I am taking the NHS to court over this, or trying to. So I need to be very careful how I phrase this, but basically I wasn't adequately informed by the people who should have. Outside in the community, what happens with bad results is I remember asking 1 or 2 people about bad results, and then this is how it was treated. They had their surgery at a different time. They were very unlucky. That doctor was a known butcher. For instance, in the Northeast, we had a doctor known as Dr. something Terry the Butcher. I don't want to say his full name because I don't want to get liable.
Sure.
And basically what he would do is just not tell patients exactly what he was doing and just essentially create a hole. And one person that I knew, and they had a YouTube, and I knew them locally, they still had all their erectile tissue. So what would happen is the tube would literally just expand out, just the tube itself, like that. Like it would just come out when obviously they were experiencing erections and stuff. And all that sort of thing was, that's totally rare. That is like, you know, that was savage. This is totally different. You're going to get, I remember, I'm sure my psychiatrist told us face to face that the one at the gender clinic, that it's amazing what the body can do to like mimic the skin and stuff. And she made it sound like my body, my mind is going to trick my own body into believing that is actually anything but an inverted penis. Like, that is literally how they lead you on. And in terms of the sort of, this is what's going to happen, here are the risks, and these are what the risks mean. And there was none of that. When I spoke to my surgeon, right, because he was quite, like, looking at him, he's quite autistic. We didn't speak to him. We spoke to the head nurse on his behalf, who was sat next to him. And what you would normally do is when you went to your pre-surgery consults, it would be you and two other trans women. So there were like three in the room, and you might get 5 minutes alone with them. And that was it. And they were like, really, it was like 3 at a time rather than 1 at a time. And it's like, is demand that high or something? And so no, I wasn't properly told in the way I should have been told. They should have really sat us down and really, really, I mean, I rejected it a few times as well.
Yeah. And I just also want to be clear, too, that there's sort of 2 issues here that we're talking about. One of them is the surgeries themselves, which obviously have given you a dysfunctional lower part of your body, right? You don't pee well. I'm assuming sex is an issue. Aesthetically, you probably don't like it. Or maybe you do. No, yeah. And it's not what you were expecting. But the other side of it, too, is even if the surgery had been, however you define successful in that genre, you don't feel anyway that you should have had the surgery at all because you're not a trans woman. You are a gay man, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so just before I throw to Helen, and then I want her to pick this up, was there any proper investigation done to determine if you actually were what you thought you were? Because you had other issues. You say in a piece you've written that you were struggling with some other stuff, right? So did they actually do an inquiry to see if you were an appropriate candidate psychologically for this? If it's what you needed to feel better, I guess is what I'm saying.
I had a lot of gender therapy sessions at the gender clinic. I had some like nearly 100 over 5 years. And at every turn, all doubt was managed. Anything that if I experienced regret or if I experienced any sort of doubt that I was trans, it was as internalized transphobia, which is the idea that you hate yourself for being trans because being trans is a minority. So there was no winning. And also when I got referred there, I'd mentioned, because like there are some people who do like have this idea that you need to like say certain things, but I from the start went in and I was like, I'm going to be completely honest. I'm not going to say anything about it, and I'm just going to like tell them everything, because I was like, I believe this would fix me. This whole thing would fix me. Yeah. So I was like, I need to be 100% clear and 100% honest, because if I'm going to get fixed, because I believed I was broken, then I need to do it right, and I need to tell them everything. So when I rang the doctor at me at the referral at the gender clinic, I mentioned all the homophobia when I grew up, and the fact that I've obviously got same-sex attraction and a history of gender non-conformity as a child. Like, I am literally a cliche on paper for what people are advocating about, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think this is why I spoke out, because I was like, I was looking around and all these opinions are sort of silenced, and there's this group agreement that no sensation and no sexual function is better than nothing, better than what you had. And I'm like, it's not. You deserve better. Like, surely, like at the bare minimum, it shouldn't be that you know, your dysphoria was so bad, you're glad that you don't have any sexual function. That's the price you pay. I'm like, no, you deserve better. If they are promising that, they should give you that. You shouldn't accept these consequences, because if people like knew, like I feel like trans people, when you talk about surgery, when they have all these issues and they say, no, but I don't regret it, is they're terrified that if they speak the truth, that will be weaponized against trans people and themselves. Right. And I understand that completely. But this story needs to be told, because it's not just me. There are many of hundreds, if not thousands of people who have this or far worse. And it gets far, far more worse than what I've experienced. I'm talking prolapses. I'm talking anal fistulations, which is where you get a hole between the bowel and the vagina.
Yeah.
You've got different types of vaginal plasties now where they use the colon to to help lubricate the neovagina, but colon fluid literally smells like a colon, which leads onto the bowel. So without being crass, it literally smells like shit, and this is what Jazz Jennings had as well. And when she woke up from that surgery, she was totally like, you could tell, like, the realization started to set in. This was not what she was sold. This was not what she was told. The dream shatters, and you're left rebuilding yourself.
This is so interesting, and I'm going to bring Helen in now with just a comment, too, that if you got these results in any other medical venue, it would be considered malpractice, and you could sue over it, right? But this seems a little bit like the Wild West, that anything that moves you toward the thing that you're not, or that you think you're not, should be acceptable no matter what the surgical outcome. What are your thoughts after listening to Ritchie, Helen?
I mean, I think you're exactly right that this is not treated like any other area of medicine. I mean, we've seen that happen with other areas of medicine before. Something comes along and, doctors, the people who become doctors are not typical people, for good and ill. Like, they're people who are unusually motivated to help people, but they can also be people who think of human beings as Lego and who are keen on trying things, like they've a bias towards doing things because it's exciting. It's much harder to say, I think we should be conservative. I think we should wait. A good doctor will say that, of course, but, not everyone is going to do that. So when I was researching for my book, I did spend some time looking into details of people who weren't happy with their surgery. And the thing I found most striking was that some of the people who would say openly that they regarded their surgical transition as a success, when they were talking to each other, would admit that actually it hadn't been what they thought it would be. So there were a few trans women here who are reasonably well known in England who I found a conversation between them that's now been taken offline, in which, they admitted that the neovagina wasn't deep enough to have sex, that they had pain, that they, there was no pleasure in it at all. But the thing is that once you've done these things, there's no way back. So you do what everybody does when you make a decision that doesn't quite work out, whether that's the job you choose or who you marry or having kids or not having kids or whatever. You tell yourself a story that allows you to move forward as best you can. So there's this false narrative that there are people for whom it's been a success and there are people who regret what happened. I think there's quite a lot of people who wouldn't exactly say they regret it, because what's the point? They can't go back. They can live with it, or they're not as brave or clear-sighted or honest with themselves as somebody like Ritchie is. They're someone who, and everyone has to do what they have to do to move on. I'm not saying anyone has to, ruin their lives by radical honesty. But lots of people, the easiest thing they can do is sort of trim their cloth to fit the new life that isn't what they thought it was going to be at all. And so I think there's this really false question that people who are pro-transition and pro-gender medicine and pro the idea of gender identity have, that, there's a minority who regret. I think regret is the wrong concept because, people mostly won't tell you they regret a decision they made, even if they would have done differently if they could go back, because they can't. There's no point. They've got to move forward. The whole thing just seems ill-conceived from the start.
Well, it almost feels a little bit like, and this is probably not the right phrase, maybe you guys have a better one, but it feels a bit like mass hypnosis, that there's a bunch of people who are saying that a thing is so, and you believe them, and you do a radical thing because you believe them, and it turns out not to be so, but you don't want to either, admit that you've been fooled or risk the wrath of this tribe who deny reality so vociferously that there's danger in actually being honest the way that Ritchie is. Is that a good analogy?
I have a theory about this, which is that a lot of people, I call it the politician's fallacy. So the politician's fallacy is something must be done. This is something, therefore we must do this.
Right.
So people find it very hard to say to someone, I can't help. I can sit with you. I can express my sympathy for what sounds like a very difficult situation, but fundamentally I can't help. And there are lots of things that we can't fix. I mean, we die, we're mortal. There are many illnesses that we don't know how to cure. My mum has MS. I wish I could fix it. I can't.
Yeah.
People don't have children who want to have children. Many bad things happen in people's lives that you can't fix. And, friendship and support and all of those things is being there for people, helping to the extent you can, just being with them when you can't help. But for some reason, we've got it into our head that there's something we can do for people who wish they were the opposite sex. And then, because that thing is available, whether it's good or not seems secondary. Like when we talk about kids, this is even more pointed, because people say, you must stop puberty from happening in a child who wishes that they were a member of the opposite sex, because the changes in puberty are irreversible. So you would block puberty and then give the child time to decide whether they would take cross-sex hormones. And I want to say to them, look, you're stopping a natural process that's incredibly important, and it's when your brain develops and it's when you become an adult and all of those things. And they say, yes, but the child's miserable. What are you going to do? Well, the answer could be nothing. It could be that there's nothing I can do except, be there for them. But that somehow is an unacceptable answer, because there is something you can do. And the question of the wisdom of that thing seems to come secondary to the fact that it's possible to do it. And then, then we start doing it, and then you sound like a right bitch if you don't want to do it. You sound like a mean person. I'm not being mean. I think it's very mean to do what happened to Richie.
Yeah. Richie, let me ask you this. What is your feeling about having gone through this and now watching the issues that are growing up around this sort of cohort of children? There's a certain age of children now who are being fast-tracked through this, and it's odd in so many ways. For me, it feels very much like an Emperor's New Clothes thing. Like I can't help but call it out. But I will also say that it took me a while to get there. I said this to Helen the other day, and we were talking. I do, because I was such a proud ally to gay people back in the day when I was an AIDS journalist back in the 80s and 90s, and took that very, very seriously. I hesitated a bit to jump in here without fully understanding the reality of what it was, also because it's so bizarre that you almost can't take on how bizarre it is, right? But now I get it, and especially talking to you and understanding the surgery and how kids, once they get on the gender affirming track, that is it. The train is going to go through the tunnel. What's it like for you to be watching this from the sidelines? It must be very, very difficult.
So I'm of the opinion that there are people who, and I believe it is a small minority, who do benefit from transition, and I don't want to take that away from people who will benefit from that. But we have hugely overshot. And when it comes to children, I think it's bordering on cruelty to tell a child who is about to or has gone through puberty that any sort of discomfort with your body means that you need to change it and you need to medicalize or you need to stop it. And it's like, puberty is difficult, full stop. Like, take out the gender stuff, it's difficult for a lot of people. And answer your question on how does it make me feel, I feel like we need to look wider on just the child. I think you also have to look at the parents in a lot of these scenarios, because a lot of the parents who really, you get parents saying that they knew from 18 months, and you're like, come on, like Josh Jennings' parents again, like 3 or 4, this child that wanted to engage in play, and they are the ones who put this toxic label on it that means, oh, they're a girl, they're therefore suffering, therefore I need to be the parent that defies all odds and transitions my child because I'm the virtuous one, I'm the righteous one. And in a lot of instances, it becomes less about the kid's well-being and more about the status of having a trans kid. And I think that is a huge factor, and I feel like it is betrayal. And I think the Cass review has highlighted that too, that there are issues with parents in some regards. And also there is a lot of comorbidities, like such as autism. There's a lot of gay kids. They even joked, and I think was it Sue Evans who blew this one, or was it later, where the joke that at this rate there will be no more gay kids because they're trans in a way, they're gay.
Yeah.
And it's like, everyone kind of knows what's happening. And also you've got the issue with, in the US, to get a puberty blocker, for instance, if you're not insured, that can cost up to $30,000 per year. But if you're insured, it's still expensive, but it's something like 6 or 7 times more expensive to, under no insurance in the US for some reason, to give it to a child than it is the adult, because the adults and the children have, they take very similar blockers, like the GnH antiandrogens, like Lupron and spirolactane and Zoldex Gozrilin, which is the one I had, and I always butcher the name. And also, just to jump in on one point about the term regret, I think regret is a sort of a branding term that has been used with specific effect to put the onus on the individual rather than anyone else, because you regret a bad, like, a bad financial decision, you regret a bad relationship or something like that, because you entered into that with knowledge and foresight and you had other options available. That's regret. Regret is you had all these other options, but for me it's not. They didn't present another option. I said no to them enough times. But if you keep asking somebody with very low self-esteem if they want something, and then you say, okay, we're going to discharge you and take away your therapist and all that, almost as like a blanket threat. And it's like, they called me an ideal candidate for gender reassignment surgery.
Wow.
And I don't understand. I want, even if this case that I'm taking goes nowhere, I want them to explain what the fuck that means. And excuse my French, but sometimes, you just feel so really angry. And again, the whole term about regret, and regret is, it's bad PR because it puts the onus on the individual. Like, you regret it, you have the guilt, you have the grief. And I'm like, actually, the thing that made me speak out and feel empowered was the fact that I accepted all responsibility before, all 100%, and it nearly killed me, and it kills people. I believe a lot of trans deaths are detrans deaths too, the ones that take their lives. It needs a proper investigation to see if they had surgery and stuff. And if you look at, even on the stuff that they present, the TDO list, you can see it. But no, I don't like using the term regret. I use the term betrayed, because that's what it is. It's a betrayal.
Yeah, can I jump in there? I mean, it's not the way that we measure any other healthcare procedures. We don't say, are you glad that you had your knee operation or your hip operation or whatever? We have functional outcomes. And we say what the functional outcomes we expect are, like that you can walk further, or that you have lowered pain, or longer life, or, just more function generally. Yeah. And normally you would compare different treatment options, and sometimes you would randomize between people who get different options, and you'd look forward and you do a long-term study, and in the end you'd say, oh, you know what, doing keyhole surgery means shorter recovery times and less infection, so we'll do it that way, or something like that. It's ridiculous to say that we would decide between doing keyhole surgery for appendix or, open surgery by asking people what they regretted or didn't regret. It's just, you only live once. You can't compare your own life with the life that you could have had. You have to do a properly designed study and compare outcomes for different choices, different treatment options.
Sorry, I just have to jump in because that's so smart, Helen, because this is a field of medicine and psychology, I guess, right now, too, that it seems like all of the normal checks and balances, all the guardrails, like doing proper studies that can actually be proven with data and having objective reviews of what's going on. Those things are off the table now. It feels like it's gone so far that they don't want to know the truth. They just have to keep on going.
Well, what they would say is that it would be unethical to do the study. But the thing is, we've been there before in medicine. That's been said many times by doctors.
Yeah.
You know, we know what, you know, I'm the professional, the doctor will say, I'm the professional. I know what's best to do. I know what the treatment should be. And if I have to do some randomized controlled trial where some people get the treatment and some people don't, I'll be withholding the best treatment from some people, and that's unethical. And I used to work for the Royal Statistical Society, and I had to write articles about this sort of thing. You know, the history of medical statistics is very interesting. And there are things that doctors have been certain that they were doing the right thing. I mean, an example is injecting cortisone into inflamed Achilles tendons. They were sure that was the right thing to do if you'd sore Achilles. And it wasn't until they did a randomized controlled trial that they found out that it weakens the Achilles tendon and makes it more likely to rupture.
Yeah.
So, you know, and again, doctors didn't want to do that. They were sure they were doing the right thing, and they were sure it would be unethical to withhold that treatment from some people. And we know these things about evidence-based medicine. You know, we know that people mislead themselves into thinking, I mean, there's lots of things that people do with backs in particular, like they're very hard to treat, and people generally think they've got a little bit better if you do something. So we know that the placebo effect exists. We know that people persuade themselves that something will be better than nothing. And, you know, doctors have this bias to do stuff rather than not do stuff. So we don't normally do this. But with this, I think we've persuaded ourselves that there's a magical, mystical gender essence, and that trans children or trans people are some different class of people. And, you know, that it's like almost a birth defect that you were given the wrong body. So, you know, and if you imagine that, like if it was really possible that we could get trapped in the wrong body, it would be the most extraordinary, terrible thing to be trapped in the wrong body. And so you take almost any side effect.
Yeah.
You know, sterility, oh, well. No sexual function, oh, well. You know, it's better than randomly having parts of the opposite sex sprouting on you when you don't want them. So all common sense and all normal standards fly out the window. And we don't ask questions like, you know, a person who's got gender dysphoria, which means that you're, you know, you're very uneasy and unhappy and uncomfortable with your sexed body, or being perceived as your sex. We don't ask, could that person just kind of be taught to get over that or to cope? Or might they grow out of it? Or might it mean something else? You know, it doesn't have to mean that you have to transition, but we act like it means that you have to transition. And this is not medicine. This is really not medicine, what's being done.
It's not. No, it's well, and the hurling around of the word transphobe, if you're trying merely to understand better what someone's predicament is one of the most dangerous aspects of this. I mean, you just cannot ask questions. Richie said something that really struck me, and he said, all doubts were managed. All doubts were managed. So he was not allowed to not be 100% committed to this path that they had put him on. That is a shocking thing to say. I mean, practicing psychiatry is, yeah.
They just don't do that in other sorts of medicine. You choose between outcomes, and the doctor is trying to give you the information and then not to guide you and not to lead you and not to pressure you, because really it's up to you to decide whether you want to take a risk, you know, how much the pain bothers you, how much the lack of function bothers you, or whatever it is, depending on the operation. But in this, it's like you're being a social justice warrior by having the operation.
Well, and by doing the operation, and by doing that is the kind of folie à deux, right? I mean, the people doing it think they're on a mission, and they convince the people getting it that they need to be on that mission too, and that's kind of what happened. Richie, you wanted to say something, sorry.
Yeah, it's just to reflect on that it is such a deep anchor to staying trans that a lot of people who detransition post-op feel this, well, my body's already drastically changed. What's the point? Why would I want to swap one trans for another? Why would, in essence, go from a trans woman to a trans man? Because you're going to need hormones, and you're going to have a vagina as a man. You're going to be exactly like a trans man in a lot of essence. What's the point? You know, There was a point earlier that you mentioned about the group psychosis on this, and I think that comes into it with the all doubts are managed. So you've got the professionals who are adamant that this is the solution, nothing else is the solution. And then you've got the community who will, anyone who does have a bad time will get hug boxed and be like, you should sue your surgeon because that's not normal. The normal thing is you have this perfect outcome and you live happily ever after.
Yeah.
But after a while, you do eventually just wake up. But another thing that what they don't talk about is a lot of people in this community, an overwhelmingly massive, huge amount, and I think it even comes out in the surveys, they are all addicted to something, or they are alcoholics, or they've got very, very unhealthy lifestyles. They rely on stimulants, and these are people who are constantly self-medicating, and they're getting wheeled into surgery too. But the story, what I was going to very briefly touch on, was before I entered the gender clinic, I was trying to get tret for OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. I had very severe OCD for many years, and I saw a psychologist, and he was helpful, but he was like, you need more help on your OCD sort of thing. And as those sessions were ending, I found the trans thing basically, and considered myself trans and self-referred. And when I went in the gender clinic, they were like, you can be a trans person and have OCD. Just because you have OCD doesn't mean anything, right? That's kind of what was framed at to me. And to me, looking back, it's trans was the obsession. It was part of that obsessive pattern, which was fueled by the internet, and it was fueled by substances too, because a lot of us we all are, and not every single one, but I would say about 80 to 85% easy, very easy. And what happened after surgery was, because I mentioned I had a lot of therapy sessions, I had the surgery in May 2018, and I re-engaged with therapy in, I think, August 2018. And the first thing I said was, I think I've made a catastrophic mistake doing this. And I got very upset, and I was told them I was going to, that they misdiagnosed us. Even then, I was raging. And they said, you've just had a major surgery and you've just had anaesthetic. And because I had follow-up surgeries too, in a relatively short period of time as well, they said the impact of having anaesthesia can lower your serotonin levels. Therefore, that means that this is all an OCD rumination. You're not actually experiencing regret. You're experiencing an OCD rumination because you can't answer this question. What if you made the wrong choice? That's a rumination, see? And I went back the next month, the next weeks and months, and I just kept going back and saying the same thing. No, I feel the same. This was a terrible idea, blah, 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 blah. And then in the end, they just kind of made me believe that this was an OCD thing, and what I needed to do was get tret for my OCD. So they then referred us for OCD treatment about 6 months later, because they said my OCD was really bad.
So what's interesting about what you're saying is that it reminds me on something that Helen and I touched on. We were talking the other day that predates this by about 25 years, and that is back in the day when psychiatrists and psychologists were misdiagnosing people as having been sexually abused by satanic cults, right? And I did a bunch of those stories, and there was never any evidence, and the police could never find anything. And instead of admitting that there was something wrong with the story, they would say, well, the police can't find anything because they're involved, right? And the mayor's involved, and the prime minister's involved, and right? So it was like there is a scenario that they believe. The people who were pulling this out of children in these really weird questioning sessions that brought about a couple of cases that were wrongfully prosecuted, they'd been trained to interview a certain way, and they believed in the satanic ritual abuse cause. So if you sent those people in, they got the kids to say what they wanted them to say, and none of it was true. But it infected a whole profession. The child psychiatrist, the psychologist, all the people involved in that scenario were kind of hypnotized into believing it was true. It eventually went away because there were cases brought to court where people were suing over it, right? And I said to Helen the other day, I wonder if that's what's going to happen here. You are suing, right? Yes. Is Helen still there?
Yes, I am. I just turned off my camera for...
Just want to make sure.
Yeah, for bandwidth reasons.
Just want to make sure we hadn't lost you. So just before I go to Richie to talk about the lawsuit, I just want you to pick up on what I was saying, because you did say to me the other day, and I thought, this bingo, I now understand the dynamic, that this is like that period where there was recovered memory and satanic ritual and multiple personality disorder, and it was all being kind of invented as an artifact of hypnotherapy in these psychologist practices. It seems very, very similar to this, because there's no way in and nowhere out of the paradigm, right?
Absolutely. And it goes back even further than that. So I read a bunch of books. When I was writing my own book, I read a bunch of books about the history of psychiatry and psychology and therapy in general. And really, ever since people have started to have this idea that people's minds are broken and that the broken mind is causing a bodily problem, there's this thing called the symptom pool, which is in your culture, the ways that you can express bodily your mental discomfort or dis-ease. So nowadays we don't have, hysteria the way that they did in 19th century Paris.
Right.
Because at the time, the idea was that the woman's uterus went wandering around the place and gave her, fits, and she would faint and she would fall down. And, so you learn in your culture how to express your unhappiness and discomfort. And it varies from place to place. I mean, it doesn't vary like completely. You can see the family resemblance from place to place.
Yeah.
But the precise interpretation that you have of what it is that you're feeling, and the precise way that it lands on your body, like, do you feel that it's in your stomach? Do you feel it's in your throat? Do you feel it's in your back or whatever? That varies. It's called somatizing, the experience of feeling in your body what's actually really originated in your mind. And so I really got shivers reading this, because in this book that I was reading about the history of mental illness and the treatment of it, very casually, the writer, this book was about 20 years old, so it predates all of what we're talking about. The writer said, often when it's women, doctors feel moved to intervene in the reproductive system. It seems to be this idea that comes to doctors again and again, that when women come in and say, I'm distressed, I'm unhappy, I feel awful, everything's wrong, whatever, doctors cut out their reproductive organs. Now, it's done less often with men, but it is sometimes done with men. And here we are doing it again.
Yeah.
People are coming in and saying, I feel ill at ease in my body. They're interpreting that as gender dysphoria, but in a different era, they absolutely wouldn't. It wouldn't have been their gender they'd have landed on. And it's like we learned nothing. Like, I wonder, do doctors get taught anything about this stuff? It's actually very, very, very depressing. I honestly feel like Cassandra, that I'm just watching disaster unfold and I'm shouting as loud as I can. And I'm certainly not the only one who's shouting, of course. But it's like I can't stop them. I can't stop the disaster unfolding. And, in 10 or 15 years or whenever it is, so many people who are cheering it on now, they'll never, ever admit that they were. They'll just have moved on. It's like, the supporting the Iraq war or something like that. Like, you can't find people who did at the time. And it's just so depressing. And what will the next thing? What's the next mad thing that we're going to do be? But yeah, here we are yet again, Trish.
Well, you are kind of, Cassandra, because again, you've made a brilliant analogy, the Iraq war. Like, I marched against the Iraq war. It was clear that there were no weapons of mass destruction. I was convinced of that. But what drove that, at the end of the day, was the same thing that's driving this, and that is a completely corrupt legacy media who bandwagon these things and create a narrative, and there's no way in and there's no way out. And I remember I was watching Judith Miller from the New York Times doing her reporting on Curveball and saying that he had, I can't remember if he was the nuclear guy, but he'd provided evidence that Saddam had weapons and it was all a lie. I waited to see the apologies from the Washington Post and the New York Times. It was a paragraph on page 5, right? 1 million dead or whatever if you include everybody, all these American kids maimed and missing 4 limbs, and you get a paragraph in the New York Times. I mean, it's absolutely. See, we've lived too long. That's our problem. Because,
and that's why I mind here too. You know, my body is starting to break down. I've had minor operations for this, that, and the other. Like my hamstrings are crap, and I've had to have my appendix out, and yada yada yada.
Yeah.
I remember how lovely it was to have a young body that was unmaimed, and how irreparable it is when you first pierce or alter your body, and how how precious it is to have a body that's integral. And these wretched surgeons are talking about bodies, again, I say like Lego, instead of saying to somebody how precious it is that you are integral and unmoved and unchanged. Yeah, we've lived too long in so many ways.
Yeah. Richie, I want to ask you this because, as I've said a couple of times already, and I can't say it enough, how courageous you are for being so honest and so blunt and descriptive about your predicament. And you are now in a predicament to some degree that I think there's no escape from. How do you see, well, first of all, I guess there's 2 questions. How do you keep from being so mad your head explodes? That's question 1. And how do you see the rest of your life in this circumstance? How will it be for you?
Well, first of all, is keep busy. For the first 3.5 years after surgery, after my initial task was, okay, it'll get better, I'll just recover. And it didn't get better. And I was like, okay, maybe it'll get better in a little while, I'll just focus on work. So I'll put all my energy into work. And now that I've kind of started this sort of speaking out, it's given us a great deal of distraction, but then I'm left asking when it all dies down, because it will die down soon, and I will get tired, and I have been tired, and I dip in and dip out, as we all do.
Yeah.
What then? What will the future hold? And I'm like, well, what is my role in this? And I think my role is just to raise the alarm and try my best as somebody who's been through it to speak my perspective in a sea of opinions that are overwhelmingly in favor for it. And they complain like there's, you look at any sort of talks about this or any conversations about it, and it's overwhelmingly positive, and we deserve that 1-star review, People need to be able to read it, not just the 5-star reviews. They need to know what they're not going to get told. So for me going forward, I really don't know. I wish I knew, and I think long term it's going to be very difficult, and it's going to be continuously uphill. But I think I just need to keep giving myself reasons to stay busy and stay active, because there are some moments where it does overtake you, and there's just not a lot you can do but crumble within yourself,
Well, what are those moments, Richie? Richie, tell me what those moments are for you when you crumble. What is driving that? What is that despair?
It's just an overwhelming feeling, and I did this thing for ages, up until I did transition, where I would cry a lot as a teenager, but I didn't want anyone to know, so I became, what I would do is I would cry very silently, and I would almost choke. So what happens when I get upset now, I inherently just kind of choke, like just choke up really badly. And it's because I'm trying to stop myself, and I'm trying to allow myself to sort of feel it. But I kind of just feel like sometimes it's just too much, and I would rather not,
If I could jump in, I've been talking to detransitioners now one way or another for I think 3 or 4 years. And some kind of almost graduate out of being active as detransitioners, and it's the best thing that can happen. Like, people recover meaning in their lives after the most extraordinary losses. You know, they lose limbs and, you know, partners and so on, and yet they find a way to move on. So that does happen, and you know, I think it's really, really important to register that. Yeah. And then the other thing I would say is that, you know, it's important to recognize that what Ritchie has been through is really extreme trauma. So one of the therapists that I spoke to when I first started to interview detransitioners, she gave me some really interesting and useful and helpful advice. So she said that she had started to do therapy during or just after the Vietnam War, and her first patients, she was an older woman, her first clients were really traumatized vets. And the guy that she was seeing for her own therapy and who was her mentor said to her, don't let them tell you the whole story on the first appointment, because if you do, you'll be like the taxi driver in the dark, in the rain, on the way to the airport. You tell that person your whole story because you know you'll never see them again. So if you let them tell you the full story, they'll leave and they won't come back to you. So you've got to build trust first. You've got to ask about their childhood. You've got to forge a connection. And only after a while can you start to talk to them about, you know, what might help, what they might do next and how they feel. Because really it's too... It's too much what people have been through in this, because it is a massive bereavement, but it's also a bereavement that you feel great guilt and shame for. That was another thing she said to me. She said, you know, the heart of the worst trauma is shame. Mm-hmm. People who've been traumatized feel ashamed. They feel that they have been lessened by it. And the worse the decision they made, and the more that they feel that they're to blame for the trauma, the more ashamed they feel. And so that helped me when I was doing these interviews that I did with detransitioners. But it also, I think it's important for listeners to understand, you know, A, there is a path forward, but B, this is not an easy road. And this is somebody who, you know, has experienced something that is on a level with the experience of going to war and coming back without limbs.
Thank you very much, Helen. I appreciate those words. I think Trish has just accidentally disconnected, but just to continue on what you're saying about the shame, because I think that's a really important point. That is the biggest thing that stops people from talking about it. That's the biggest thing that stops people from speaking out or speaking to the peers or speaking to anyone. They just internalize it and they hold the blame, and some of the shame they carry isn't just that. It shame breeds shame. It's like grief breeds grief. You think about everything. You think about everything that you feel ashamed for, every little action, and you know, when you're in pain, it's hard not to feel that overwhelming feeling. So I'm really keen to hear the advice for therapists, because I believe, like, going forward, though it's not my role to fix this, I'll certainly contribute in ways I can. But as you said, I want to retire from this eventually, graduate, and when I've done my bit, because I think I'm approaching that, you know.
Yeah, no one can do this forever. No one can carry this burden forever. It's too hard.
No.
You know, and at any point somebody can duck out of. We've both seen that happen with people we know, and you know, damn right too. And sometimes people come back, and sometimes they don't. And
it's important you get variety too. You can't just hear from the same old people. And again, you don't want to spill your trauma publicly. A lot of people say, no, you shouldn't
have to.
No,
you know, I'm old enough to remember when women had to, you know, really go into depth about how awful it was to be raped and how awful it was to have this, you know, domestically violent husband or whatever. And if you didn't do that, if you didn't spill your guts, you hadn't been through anything. And now we sort of are meant to at least understand that these are very difficult experiences and that nobody should have to parade their grief in order for it to be taken seriously. And unfortunately, we're having to do that again for you. And, you know, my belief, my hope and my belief is that, you know, relatively soon, over the next year, few years, I don't know how long, it will be understood that what you've been through is major medical malpractice and that the result is severe trauma of a sort, you know, an epoch, defining an epoch the same way that the Vietnam War did for the therapy profession. And then people will understand how to help people who have been through this trauma rebuild not the life that they thought they were going to have, but a life that's still a valuable and important and beautiful life as an individual human being, and, you know, all the things that therapy can do when it's good.
But it's like you said before, we've been through this before in various different ways, and one of the ways was there are adults now who are suing for puberty blockers unrelated to trans healthcare because it's left them with undeveloped organs and a whole host of other issues. And we're not just giving these kids the blocker for a few months, which is that these cases, you know, they didn't have it long term. These are kids that are getting it for years, and the impact is brutal. I've read that there are people, especially the female body, when blocked and they get given like progesterone and testosterone, that they're developing like really severe osteoporosis in their early 20s. The biggest one for a lot of the guys seems to be autoimmunity, fatigue, even if you haven't been gonicized, which for people listening means that you still have your testicles. And one of the biggest issues for people who have lost the testicles, like myself, is managing weight, managing your health generally, your tiredness. Like ever since up until surgery, I was a nice healthy weight for my height, you know, and about every year since I put on about a stone on average, since I just can't keep it off no matter what I do.
So for Americans, that's about 15 pounds.
Yeah, it's 14 pounds or so. And, you know, I'm now trying to get back at the gym and everything like that to really put the effort in. But I've a strong suspicion it's to do with having zero testosterone in my body, because that helps metabolism as well.
How are you doing, Richie? I mean, if you have someone in your life who's really caring for you.
I've got people that care for me and stuff in my life, and I've got these two wonderful creatures. And absolutely love them. Like, I need to say something about pets. Pets, yeah, cats, dogs, whatever they are, they give you a grounded reality back into the real world. They keep you in a routine. You know, they rely on you. I can't let them down. And for me, and I know it's a heavy burden to rest on the little furry shoulders, but it was an actual lifesaver, and it also kept me mentally healthy because I had to look after them, and that is a responsibility in itself. So that has been a huge factor in me being okay. But I'm fortunate to have I'm rich in the quality of the friends that I have. I'm lucky not just offline but online. I've got a supportive work environment too. Me family, the family stuff is different. Like, a lot of people don't understand with detransition. They think from the other end that you do it so you can reconnect with lost family members, and it's like, if anything, it makes everything worse, because the people that supported you are now looking at you like going, what was all that about then? And the people who didn't support you are like, haha, idiot, whatever, and they move on. And it's like, we didn't do this for anyone but ourselves. We didn't speak out because it was essentially the right thing to do. And I believe that with my heart, that this is the right thing to do. There was a point earlier, but it has escaped us. So let us think.
I'll just say one thing about your pets is that they don't judge you. There's no shame in their presence.
Yeah.
There's no.
Yeah. Richie, let me ask you this. Are you in any way in contact with other detransitioners? And also, what have you personally experienced pushback from some of the more extreme elements of the trans ideology?
Thank you so much, Trisha, for reminding me what I was going to say, because I want to go back onto the shame aspect that we were talking about earlier, Helen, where you've got all this internalized shame, and then you speak out. And then you read the comments, not just from, imagine this, you read comments not just from your so-called old community, but you read comments from people you knew, and they're saying that they're telling you how wrong you are and how you're doing this for the grift, you're doing this for the fame or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to put myself out there and be a huge, massive target in a time when it's politically not okay to do that, to be a target, to grift, to make a bit of money, when no, that seems ludicrous to me. That seems like a ludicrous suggestion. And when you're feeling an intense amount of shame and you've got people telling you it is your fault, people who you actually knew in real life before, because you can see it on their social media and you see it on Twitter, wherever, and you're just like, that hits you in a way that you can't really quite prepare. And it's just like, wow, you kind of really start to see the true colours, the things they really want to say. And this is the thing that I noticed, that if somebody does something that gets them kicked out of they get discredited by the community, it has to be normally something, as they would say, transphobic. Then you see the true colours of the community. They stack things up and they wait for the moment to unleash what they could. But if anyone has noticed, not a lot's come out about me and trans people that I know, and there hasn't been much sort of bad information or anything like that. And do you know why? Because they're terrified, and they're terrified for good reason, because one, there are still good people in that community, but two, there are people who do not want a spotlight on them for very valid reasons. And if they were to do anything to me, it'll be like, how dare anyone try and judge me when they've got so many things that they need to answer for, the things that they have covered for, like explain in a way, like, I don't want to give too many specific examples, but there's been a lot of unfavorable behavior. There's been people endorsing people who have had horrific histories where they've been perpetrators in the worst possible way, and I'm sure you can imagine where I'm heading at. And I get cancelled because I've got a problem with that, and then they would later come up and stack up with these things. But the big thing for me that keeps me going with a lot of this is I don't respect most of them. I really don't. I've lost respect. I see the colours, I see the tactics, I see what people have been saying for so long. And to me, again, not going back to the shame, it's like, I'm sorry for myself that I didn't see it sooner. But I also think that, because I've got evidence of this, obviously, on my medical records, I've got evidence in forum posts. My doubts started at the start when I transitioned. It started at the very beginning, even when I was in my most obsessed stage. I had a false start transition, in 2014. I took the hormones and I socially presented, found it horrible, and then kind of desisted essentially, but still stayed on the hormones until I moved in with a trans friend who helped restart my transition, And it was like, I naturally was walking away from this. And,
yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah. I too have experienced this thing. I mean, obviously in a much more minor way, but people somehow think that there's this immense grift that it's possible to do by being either a detransitioner or by writing about this. And I mean, the idea that Richard would go through what he's been through to make, tuppence halfpenny or nothing, it's just absurd. It's so absurd that people can't possibly believe it. I suppose that people who don't know how book publishing works might think that I'm rolling in it because of my book. But I mean, it's far and away the worst paid work I've done in my adult life. Yeah, I had to take unpaid leave to write the wretched thing. And although it sold pretty well, books don't make money, And obviously I was afraid it was going to blow up my career and life. And it has actually had a major impact on my career and life. So it just, people have this idea that there's, dark American money or something. There's this conspiratorial thinking, not just in this, but in lots of ways. Like, people are becoming much more conspiratorial. And we're the latest people that you look at. It's so bizarre.
If any billionaire Illuminati members are listening in.
Yeah, I mean, I think people say, oh, the Heritage Foundation, as people do this, they say, like, God, her grift goes on. And you're like, oh, here I am. And it's...
Can we talk about grifters, please? Can I talk about Keppels for a second, please? Here is a pure example of somebody who has taken a situation which I've got no doubt, if armed police showed up at my door, I'd be like, wow, that's pretty crazy, right? But Keppels, who is a very influential trans streamer, said in a video statement that she woke up with a gun pointed to her face. That is a proven lie. And she used this whole narrative about being arrested, being dead named in custody, being treated like a horrible person, and now she has to raise all this money to move, and all her stuff got seized and it got given back in a day. The story is somebody impersonated her and sent a threat to life to governors and councillors in the local London area, because I think it was in Canada, I believe, right? And what they did was the police responded to that with an armed response. So this is what happened. They knocked on her door. They had guns down because they do a threat assessment, but they have to have that ready for this type of threat. They knocked on the door. They politely asked to come in. They politely talked to, I think our real name's Clara or whatever, and brought her to the station, where the chief of police put out in a statement, and I'll put it on my Twitter too so people can see this. Just go back a few weeks. I think this happened about August 15th, 16th is when I started posting about it. The police chief actually posted that he personally reviewed all the audio and video footage within the police station, and there was not one instance when they were misgendered, where they were referred to as their dead name. On the database, it had their old surname on because, they didn't update the police that they'd changed the gender because their databases don't work that way, whatever. And, this is a person who's had a full apology and all sorts, puts out this sub-story that they got swatted with a gun pointed at the face, and then they got doxxed because somebody had sent a pizza to them at a hotel and they were worried about their life. And I'm like, mate, people were sending pizzas to people back in the 80s and 90s if they didn't like them. It's not just it's not a threat of life. And anyway, they set up a fundraiser, $100,000, right?
Wow.
$100,000 for what? They're going to sue them anyway, probably. And an interesting sideline is it's actually illuminated what this person's behavior is, because they've been known to collaborate and work with people and engage in themselves, where they send estrogen without parents' knowledge to underage boys.
Yes, I read about that.
And also
sent
cat collars to underage boys for the Cat Boy Ranch that Keppels ran.
What's a Cat Boy Ranch? I don't understand what that is.
That is where they lure young teenage boys from various ages into the cat boy identity. So it's like, imagine like a feminine identity, but they'll have little cat ears and stuff, and it's a sexualized sort of role play, but it's known to happen with minors, which is probably why she left Canada and is no longer in the country.
Yeah, I don't know who this person is, Richie. I missed this whole drama. It's I can't believe
it's
it.
It's a too online drama, Trish. I know it too, but that's because my life is now half on Twitter, unfortunately. There are these extraordinary stories, and you listen to them and you think this cannot be. This just can't have happened.
Were these Canadian police that
yes.
she okay? Because I in the UK it appears, at least if you read the Daily Mail, which I do more than I probably should.
No, they're the only people who are covering this really well. So
yeah, they're covering, and the Hunter Biden laptop story too. They're doing amazing reporting in the midst of all of the other stuff that they do.
Shout out to Sanchez Manin, who's an amazing
she's
journalist.
wonderful.
Who's Sanchez Manin? Who's that?
She's an absolutely amazing journalist with so much integrity and respect and care.
At the Mail? Mail?
Yeah.
Her backstory is interesting. She was a local journalist, and the Tavistock Clinic was on her patch. back in the 2000s.
Oh, okay.
And it was just one of the big institutions in her patch. So she just, got to know them. And she was actually really pro-transition and totally bought into, the story that there were some kids trapped in the wrong body. And this was a great institution that was doing great work. And she got to know parents and everything. And sometime around 2015, 2016, the kids that were coming in changed a lot. They stopped being little boys and started being teenage girls and, loads of autism and so on. So she had a ringside seat to the whole social contagion. And now she has great stories. And I would love her to write a book. She needs to write the book of the story that she saw.
She must write that book. What's her name? I'll Google her work.
Sanchez, as in the Spanish name Sanchez, Manning.
Manning. Okay. Wonderful. Yeah, I mean, this will be viewed as one of history's dark days on many, many fronts, because it's not just that the medical establishment is failing, but the media should also be asking hard questions too, and they're just not. I mean, they're so captivated by woke ideology. That's kind of a cheap way to put it, but I don't know how to describe it. They just. If an aggrieved group or a group that appears to be aggrieved says something, then they take it to be a fact, and they absolutely run with it. I don't know what do we feel? What do we know about the suicide statistic too? Because I mentioned this, I think, to Helen. There's a really delicious piece of video of an academic. I believe she's Berkeley, very beautiful woman and very highly educated as well. I looked her up. Who was being questioned quite aggressively by an American politician, I think Josh Hawley, and he was doing the "What is a Woman" trip with her, and what she resorted to at the end of it was, what you're doing is going to force people to commit suicide. In other words, if you even ask a question about the validity of this as a diagnosis or a path to surgery, that you're impeding people's psychological stability and they will die. That's the argument that's made. I'm just wondering what you two think about that.
I mean, if I can give figures first, and then maybe Richie can talk about what he's seen in the community.
Sure.
I mean, children very rarely, thankfully, commit suicide, and that's true no matter how they identify. And it's actually very hard to do research on it. It's so rare. You'd actually need to look at the population level. You'd really have to just have an entire country tracking it. And the nearest that we've got to that is that the Tavistock Clinic, because they became very concerned that campaigners here were almost inciting children to commit suicide by telling them that if their parents didn't support them to transition, they would inevitably kill themselves.
Wow.
Better a live daughter than a dead son type stuff.
That's the phrase.
So the Tavistock said that they watched their waiting list, because it was quite long. And that's every child who's referred in England and Wales to a gender clinic. So it's a population level. It's a good sample. It's not biased in any way. And they said that, sadly, one child did kill themselves. But it wasn't any different than they would have expected with children who were accessing other mental health services with a similar profile, because these are kids who have eating disorders and autism and depression and OCD and so on. So, it categorically is not the case that gender dysphoria is some special category whereby if you don't transition, you'll kill yourself. But the one thing that could change that is banging on about how it's true, because suicide is contagious. Yeah. So this is a really, really, really bad narrative, and it's very bad reporting. It shouldn't be done.
But why then? I'm always a person wondering why people like this professor would say that then. What is driving her confident espousing a statistic that's absolutely demonstrably not true? Why is she doing it?
She trusts the people who told her. I used to trust these institutions too. I used to think that people like the ACLU and HRC and GLAAD and Stonewall here were good people who were doing good work. I now don't trust anything they say, because I've looked stuff up and what they say is just not true. And so she hasn't done that work. Why do they say this particular lie? Well, if you're going to sterilize children, it can only be because the alternative is that they die. There's no other circumstance in which it would be acceptable to do something to children that would sterilize them. The only thing that you can be doing is saving their lives. So if you've bought into this whole thing that there are gender identities trapped in the wrong body in some sense, you inevitably step by step arrive at the point that you have to say the child will die if you don't do it. And then you mustn't check, because if you check, you'll discover you're wrong. And then you have to work your way back your chain of reasoning, and you get to the point that you shouldn't have been doing it. And now you've done it for so long, your blood is on your hands. So you can't walk back. You know, it's the Macbeth thing. What's that line? The Macbeth one. You know, so far stepped in blood that I'm now going to butcher Shakespeare. You've got to keep going because you can't go back. These people can't go back now.
Yes, no, they can't. Richie, what is your response to the idea that the activists use that phrase a lot, the suicide threat?
I think it's a threat, as you said, that's the key word, threat. It's almost like, as Helen said, it's a dangerous notion, especially because suicide can be contagious, especially if you believe that you're being denied and it is going to kill you, so you may as well kill yourself early. And you've got this, as I said earlier, a group-led psychosis in this narrative, and because the death narrative is everywhere in this entire thing. You've got it in the language. You know, it's like Trans Day of Remembrance. Let's worship the dead. Let's talk about
dead naming,
which is a huge one. You know, it's like, I feel like, you know, you shouldn't. If somebody says they're gonna kill themselves, if you don't give them a surgery, I think you then need to be looking at the mental health side. Because imagine if you said, "Dear doctor, I'm gonna kill myself if you don't cut off my arms," and it's just like, well, you need help, bro. You know, it's not as like, if you genuinely believe that you are your own risk to life, then you are not by nature in sound mind to be consenting to anything like that, because you're not of sound mind, right? It's a bit of a self defeating notion too. And also, there was something you said earlier about today being a dark day. I would say this week has been a brilliant week for sunlight to be shown on this mess. Mermaids versus LGB Alliance. What a show that has been. If you haven't, look at Tribunal Tweets, who very heroically captured it for us because it wasn't broadcast. You could sign up to watch it. I wish I could have watched it.
I watched part of it.
Yeah, Richie, do explain to our Canadian and around the world audience what this is about. I know what Mermaids is, but do explain what they tried. Yeah.
So Mermaids is a UK-based charity which helps to transition children, right? And they are bringing the LGB Alliance in the UK to court to question their charity status, which I believe is a first, isn't it? You know, no charity has ever done that to another charity. It is unheard of. Now, their original intent was to make LGB Alliance look like all these hated, bigoted, right-wing extremists, but it is catastrophically backfired in a way that I feel like is going to start sinking Mermaids, and it's shining a light on to the logic, it's shining a light onto the beliefs, it's shining a light, like, so one of the things they said, some of the witnesses and even the lead of Mermaids said that they hadn't fully read the CAS report. So either they're lying to prevent further questioning because they know the CAS report, the interim CAS report, has got damning judgments about this treatment and about the numbers and about the 9,000 kids that have went through the Tavistock over the last so many years. Right?
So this is the report that caused the Tavistock to shut down? The gender. Yeah, okay, go ahead.
So they don't want to answer that, the CAS report. They don't want to answer that, so they pretend that they haven't read it. Now, that is a problem too. If you haven't read it and you run a service for transition and youth, that is a huge, major issue. Yeah. So not only have the witnesses done this, but the lead of the charity has done this too, who, oh my God, the audience need to have a look at it. It's like history in the making.
Where can you find it? Where could we see it?
You know, we don't televise trials here, and it's actually illegal to record them. I attended a part in person, and I watched yesterday, but not today. I had to get some work done. So the only record of it is this heroic coalition of women who tweet as @tribunal_tweets. And they're not court reporters. They're doing their best to give a live tweeting, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's quite extraordinary. I mean, Mermaids, just to give you some picture of who they are, they were a small charity that wasn't insane, was really just parents helping parents with gender dysphoric kids, tiny numbers. And then a woman called Susie Green, who transitioned her own son, became the CEO, and she's a very good marketer and very good speaker and so on. There's a TED talk of her still available in which she describes taking her son to Thailand when he was 15. And on his 16th birthday, he had his surgery to remove his testicles and penis. Oh. And she talks about this. She talks frankly about how her husband was afraid when the child was 2 or 3, because he was so sissy, that the husband was afraid that he was going to be gay. And they went to a therapist, and the family therapist said, look, you've got to stick together. Whatever you do, the two parents have to stick together. And the decision was, transition the kid rather than accept that he's a gay boy. So that's Susie Green, 16th birthday present, get castrated.
And so she's running Mermaids.
She's still heavily involved. She's not the person who gave evidence. She was there in the courtroom when I was there on Monday. I think that you can't underestimate the importance of people like this who have made what, in my judgment at least, is a horrific decision, how unwilling they are ever going to be to fully examine what they did.
Yeah.
And so those people, they're so far in, they have to just keep digging, there's no way out. It's worse than doing it to yourself, definitely, to do it to your child.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's zealotry, isn't it? It's not advocacy, it's zealotry.
It's homophobia is what it is.
It is homophobia too. Look at our poor lesbian sisters. Well, I again, in the Daily Mail, picked up the paper a couple of weeks ago to see 3 lesbians being removed from a gay pride parade because the trans extremists didn't want them there.
That's right. Well, it's because they say that they don't sleep with people with penises, otherwise known as men, But if these men say they're women, then suddenly, wow, magic words, I mean, I absolutely feel different towards people sexually, depending on what they call themselves not. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of the evidence this week was exactly that, because the LGB Alliance is led by 2 lesbians, both of them in their 70s, remarkable women who've been campaigning for gay rights for 50 years now, and who came back out of retirement when they saw what was happening to young lesbians and to children.
So I should be reading Julie Bindel about this, I guess, eh?
Julie was there too. Julie's writing a lot about it. I mean, there's several people. I think there's going to be a lot of coverage about it. But yeah, they were being questioned as to, like really it was being suggested that they were being outrageous, saying that this ideology is homophobic, when just on the face of it, it is. Like, if a woman can't say, I don't go near men, any of them, no matter what they call themselves.
Yeah.
Then you're back in the days of she just needs a good seeing to. She just hasn't found the right man,
Well, I really noticed this extremism a couple of years ago. It was really the J.K. Rowling and the TERF word. I am an old school feminist who also likes men.
Same.
Yeah, and I thought, what the hell is going on here? Like, J.K. Rowling is now transphobic. That's ridiculous. It's like, same with me. I have pretty good bona fides with the gay community. So what is going on now that we don't want all of these things ruining our lives, and that makes us bad people? So that's when I started paying some attention to it. So I had a lot of catching up to do. But what I see now, and I think what Richie, what you were describing about this tribunal and the Mermaids and the LGB Alliance, is the idea that this is an ideology that cannot withstand scientific scrutiny, right? And I said this to Helen the other day, that the Matt Walsh film, For Good and Ill, there's good stuff about it as well, What is a Woman? The main thing for me about that film that really smashed this home was that, and I thought he handled it well, his tone was reserved. He wasn't attacking people. He was quite polite, a little sarcastic, but, quite polite. When he was interviewing the surgeons and the experts cutting up kids, if he got to the point where they actually had to defend it on material grounds, statistically, scientifically, whatever, they always tried to shut down the interview. Right? To a person. And that is very much like what Helen and I were talking about with the recovered memory. Same thing. I interviewed those people. And when I started hitting them with actual data and asking them to explain themselves, they couldn't, and they'd shut down the interview and walk out. And that's what we have here. And I think maybe that's what the tribunal is illustrating, that they cannot withstand tough questions and scrutiny. And you know what? As a former journalist, the tough questions and scrutiny should have happened 5 years ago. That's we've missed a step.
You know, as you know as well as I do, journalism has changed loads, and not in good ways. You know, we've got it used to be a muckraking profession. You know,
absolutely.
You worked your way up from local journalism, and I mean, there's a journalist, Jeremy Paxman, who's I think recently retired here, and the Paxman question. I actually think this is a great way to interview, but it's a good thing to have in mind. His question is, why is this lying liar lying to me? So, that's the way you come in. Like, you know, you don't take something on trust. You don't. If somebody tells you that they don't want to tell you about something, you ask more. You know, that's where you get suspicious. You know, people who learned to doorstep people who had just lost a child or terrible things like that. You know, you became mature. And now instead you come in, usually on unpaid internships and, you know, getting freelance pay that's really low, like $25 or $50 or $100 for an article that may take you days to report. So no one can do it unless they're rich. Yeah. So you've got graduates, and they're usually graduates in stupid subjects like gender studies. And they know nothing. They've got no experience. And so I just today I was reading through media guides on trans issues, and I found one from a coalition called ILGA, ILGA, International something, something, something. And it was the most stupid thing I'd ever read. It wasn't, it purported to be about, to be a guide for journalists, but it was a guide for activists. It was saying things like, you know, make sure that you're not just doing negative stories, do positive stories, you know, paint people in a good light. It's like, that's not journalism. That's just puff pieces. So yeah, journalism has really lost its way.
It has. It has. What were you going to say, Richie?
That's a church pamphlet telling someone.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then they get cross with you when you don't do that. Like if other journalists are giving them space to talk utter nonsense and say whatever they want and not face any tough scrutiny, they won't talk to you if you do give a bit of scrutiny. So I've never managed to talk to any of the organisations like Mermaids or Stonewall. They won't talk to me. Yeah.
Well, that's true in a lot of phases right now. We've done some pretty critical coverage of some of the COVID issues, you know, from a scientific perspective, you know, whether lockdowns worked, what about the nudge units, is that the appropriate way to go, all that sort of stuff. And the people on the other side don't give interviews. This is a new day in journalism where people just don't appear on your show if you're going to ask them hard questions. They just don't do it. No matter how fair or how good your reputation, but why would I go on with her? She's going to make me explain myself. And this is not good. You know, look, Richie, what happened to you would not have happened if the media had been doing their jobs. I believe in the industry so much that I can actually say that if they were holding to account Tavistock and these, not that you went through Tavistock, but Tavistock and these other places, we would have been having the conversation that the three of us are having now 10 years ago.
I think Sue Evans tried this in 2003 and 4, didn't she?
Yeah, I mean, she's you know, it's literally 20 years that people have been blowing the whistle on the Tavistock.
Yeah. Really? Wow.
Yeah, and it just, you know, it disrupts the narrative. I mean, journalists will talk now about the narrative. Like, what bloody narrative, mate? Yeah. You know, it's absolutely extraordinary to me. I mean, it's depressing. Yeah.
But look, Richie's alive and well, aren't you, friend?
Yes.
Yeah. And you seem...
I'm alive and kicking.
And you seem pretty good. I think the more you speak out and advocate, the better you'll feel, because you'll realize they can't really hurt you. You know, they can't.
I'll be fine. I'll be okay.
I think Richie has to decide that minute by minute for himself, though, I think. And I also think that he has to step back if he needs to.
Yes.
I worry a lot about these kids, you know. I mean, you're not meant to have to be that wise at 30 or whatever Richie is.
I'm 35.
He's 35. Wow. But,
you know,
for me,
15.
I've got you do look 15, and I have a 40-year-old son, so you're a kid to me.
I got ID'd for an energy drink the other day, and I was furious.
Oh, my husband got ID'd on his 40th birthday going to buy beer. This is a good while ago.
Yes,
and it's still the experience of his life, seriously.
Yeah, that's a good one.
He regards this as the best birthday present. So well done, Richie.
Yeah, good for you.
Got under 19 bus tickets sometimes too. Which is
So, Richie, what would you say to parents of a kid and they're going to start down this road? You know, the child is maybe being a little fluid in the way they perceive their gender, whatever the language is these days. There's a lot of pressure on parents to be part of this. It's cool, it shows your liberal bona fides, et cetera, et cetera. What would you say as someone who's been through this? What would you say to the parents?
I would say to the parents, first of all, if they end up in deep or if they end up obsessed, don't argue. You will not win, even if you're right. Even if your argument is perfect, even if you present it in the best possible way and you've got everyone backing you up, they will always win in their head, right? You cannot win with logic. You have to use the baseline emotion. If they are appearing angry or if they are appearing happy, you need to tell them. You need to be like, you look good today, you look happy today, I can see you got a spring in your step. Or, if they're looking slouched and they're very closed off, it's like, are you okay? I can see that you're like really closed off with your body language, and just giving them a mirror. Be a mirror to your kid and just reflect back at them what you're seeing. So if you have a kid that engages in this and they are like way better than they ever was before, take a step back and ask yourself, like, are they doing better because this is working? And it might be in some cases that it does work. I am doubtful that it's going to be the vast. I think it's going to be a very, very, very small amount. Very small, much smaller than what we have. But we have to accept that for some, it may benefit them and it may not otherwise. And I think we need to be careful that we'll go in with the disposition that this is 100% wrong. It could be that the answer is that they're just a little bit fluid, or it could be eventually that maybe as an adult, after all the informed discussions I've had and all the evaluations that have been done, and they've really sat and looked at the negative outcomes of these surgeries and the positive ones, that they decide to go down with it, so be it. Because we'll have to accept that just because it's wrong, not right for me, doesn't mean it's not right for absolutely every single individual. And I say that because I do generally worry where the hyperbole goes, because if you can end it at no one is trans, what's to stop somebody saying no one is really gay?
Yeah, I understand that. But I guess what I'm also asking you to is just the idea that it's interesting to hear you say don't argue, because it feels like the influences coming from the internet and now in schools in North America, they're certainly really pushing this in early grades on people, and there's also the social contagion aspect. I guess what I'm asking you is, and maybe Helen could just come back in here if she has an idea, because I think it's important. How do you keep, if your advice is that you can't unring the bell, how do you prevent it from going as far as it did? And here in Canada, like parents really don't have a say, right? What do you do then? What do you do?
Here, I want to go back on what I said earlier about if you observe your child is happy, and they're happy, that's great. But in most circumstances, the concerned parents aren't observing happy children. They're observing children that are withdrawn. They're observing children that are deeply depressed, or they're lashing out in new ways. These aren't the signs of happy kids, which is why I had the caveat. If they are genuinely happy, then it's fine. But if they are not, and I think this is what's happening, where parents know their kids better than anyone else. My mother knows me better than anyone in this planet. She knew from the get-go that I was like gay, and I think she said to me dad once or twice when I was a kid too. And even now in detransition, we're able to have more adult conversations about that as well. And she was like, I kind of always knew. She was the one who protested a medical appointment with the psychiatrist and made that psychiatrist made her feel like shit. And I regret, that's one of my biggest regrets, is bringing her there to get told off, because that's what I did when I was deep in it. But going back on the children thing, the internet, as you said, that fuels this addiction. That is the highway to this. So limit that internet time as much as possible if you think it's overtaken them. And if you can, if you're in the position to, and you have to, if school's overrun, move. That is drastic, and not everyone can do that. But if you are that, if it's so severe that you can't do anything else, sometimes just a month away from that environment, in an outdoor environment, in a cabin in the woods or something for a month.
Yeah, I think parents can't. You can't really escape it. It's everywhere. It's online. It's in schools. It's in the books they read. It's in their friends and so on. So I do think that although it's not an answer to your own child, I think people have got to advocate to root it out of these places. And by it, I mean the ideology, the idea that you can be a member of the opposite sex, by doing something, declaring it or whatever. So that's a sort of medium term thing. Everybody's got to do that. Everybody's got to start complaining to their schools and complaining to school boards and standing for election on school boards and writing to politicians and telling politicians they're going to vote on this issue and so on. And if we don't do that, then we deserve to lose our children, because they've come for the children. And if you can't stand up for them, then, what is it for? What's politics for if it's not that?
I would like to say on that one that this is why they come after women, because women look after children.
Yeah, that's right. Everybody who wants to prey on children comes after women, because women are the people who stand in the way of all the predators. And this is a predatory idea. I'm not saying the individuals are predators, but this idea is predatory.
Yes.
And then on an individual level with children, I completely agree with Richie. Do not argue with them. You cannot argue people out of positions they didn't argue themselves into. They don't believe this for rational reasons. They believe it because it's being sold as a cure to everything that ails children. Like, no matter what's wrong with them, they're told that transition will fix it. And when you say don't transition, you're saying, I want to leave you miserable. So you've got to try and, I've had friends who've had some success with talking to their children about, what do you mean? What is it that makes you think that? Like, really open-ended questions. Give the impression that you want to learn, that you're not the one who's telling them, that you want to understand them, and see if you can gently open their mind to other possibilities. Would it help to think about maybe this child is ASD? Maybe this child's friends are really toxic and they know that too, really, but they don't quite want to put it into words and so on. And I don't guarantee that all of this will work, because we are in the grip of absolutely cultish, dangerous, predatory ideology, and that it is feeding on children.
Can I also add in that I do speak to a lot of parents that are so worried and so desperate that, and this isn't impossible to ask for them, especially with the ones who are worried sick, but you need to show confidence and leadership with your children, because if you come at them and you're a bleeding heart about how I don't recognize what's happening to you and it's destroying me and how much it's impacting you and how much it's ripping you apart, they're going to withdraw. They're not going to talk to you. And I think a jump of what Helen was saying about the ones where they've said, what do you mean? That's because there's a line of communication there, and they're talking to their child as an individual and in a person, rather than the parent of the child who's worried that they're about to run in front of the road. It's like the difference between teaching your kid how to cross the road than like hovering over that every single movement. You just can't.
Yeah. Wow, this is so big. I think history is going to really look back on this time. It's funny, Helen, what you said about the Iraq War. Maybe history won't look back. Maybe they won't. Maybe it'll just end. And yeah, so it'll get ended by lawsuits or something like that, or whatever. They just won't pay the insurance for doctors doing it or something, and it'll end quietly, and no one will really pay. And
a few people might, but and there'll be a lot of damaged people. There are still people in mental institutions who went through the recovered memory syndrome. We just don't talk about them anymore.
Yeah.
What did you ever hear anything about the people who'd had lobotomies?
Right.
Tens of thousands, and they were just left to rot in institutions, and we moved on. It wasn't news anymore.
These massive mistakes made by institutions and professions, where this kind of moral panicky kind of cult-like thinking takes over. It scares me. you know, because I've been around long enough. I've covered a bunch of these now. Like, you think, oh, that'll never happen again. Here we go again. I didn't see it for what it was 5 years ago, but now because of people like you two and others who've written about Abigail Shrier and people who've written about it, I'm like, wow, this is just like recovered memory. This is just like satanic ritual. And a whole profession is, there was a woman named Elizabeth Loftus who I've become friendly with. I covered her back in the early 90s on the recovered memory. She's a memory expert. She used to have to go to professional conferences with bodyguards.
Yeah, I read about her. Yeah.
She was a leader in her field, but she was considered someone who hated women and children because she was exposing the foolishness of suggesting that you can be raped by your father for 18 years and have literally no memory of it. That it ever could, doesn't work that way.
Yeah, no,
right?
no. Here we are again. So I mean, you know, I don't think we're not here again. And the way I conceptualize what my aim is just to limit the number.
Yeah.
You know, I can't stop it, but and of course other people, but you know, the reason that I'm doing this when I could be doing something else, like this is a mad thing to be spending my time doing. I had a nice job. I had a nice life. You know, I was an editor at The Economist. And instead I find myself saying to people, sex is binary and immutable.
Yeah.
1.2 billion years of evolution. I didn't think I'd have to say these sorts of things. It's not a good idea to cut children's genitals off. You know, like anyway, the reason I'm doing it is because there's some number of children who are going to be severely and irreparably damaged, and every child fewer is worth it.
Yeah, I feel sorry for these young women, you know, because being a young female is kind of crappy.
You know what? Being a young man is pretty crappy at the moment too.
Well, it's true. I've got boys, so I get it.
Yeah, me too.
But, you know,
we've screwed the world up for kids.
We've screwed the world up for kids. Well, look at what the school closures did too around COVID. I've had people on my show saying a generation are gone and will die early as a result of having no education, right? So we're like the expert class. Big thumbs down. You don't know what you're doing. Stop thinking you're so effing smart, and actually do some soul searching here. They get this siloed thinking. You know, there's no debate. You can't. This is what we're doing, and everybody jumps off the cliff together, and we pay. It's bad.
We're changing it though. We're making history, so I'm happy with that.
I think you guys are. I know it's late over there, like 10 o'clock there now or something. Don't tell me.
It's coming towards it, but you know, it's been really worth it. I'm so glad to have the chance to talk to you again. And Richie and I have never face to face like this for a while, and he's just a pretty amazing man.
Oh, thank you, Helen. Thank you.
What I like about you, Richie, and being able to see you, which I normally don't in these things, is that you do have a beautiful smile and you smile a lot. Yeah. So that's lovely. Anyway, thank you both. You're brave people. I'm grateful to you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. And it's been lovely talking to you, Helen and Trish. Thank you.
Wasn't that wonderful? They are extraordinary human beings. And we should all feel grateful that there are people like that in the world, at the ramparts, taking the blows to speak truth. We need these people. They're really, really important right now because you're not going to get it from the media. She was a big reporter, an editor at The Economist, right? And she's now writing about this, and thank God she is. And, you know, Richie is not the most popular guy in town, blowing the lid off what happens in these circumstances either. So there are good people, and we should support them. And I hope that's kind of what we're doing by giving them voice on this show. Richie wrote a piece it's called A Detransitioner's Perspective, Awakening from the Dream of Gender Utopia. And I think it's for a magazine called Human Events. So you should get that. In her book, it's called Trans. So I do want to play for you the tape of this interloping global news reporter. It's kind of funny. I don't know what he's so mad about. Named David Aiken, giving the gears to Pierre Poilievre when he's trying to just give a talk at a news conference.
Where Canadians are spending more just to feed themselves, to heat their homes, and to buy a home in the very first place. The reason that, So, I mean, we have basically a liberal heckler who snuck in here today to, well, apparently, right. Are you going to let me make my statement?
From the guy who actually reported first on the Prime Minister breaking the law.
Yeah. Are you going to let me make my statement?
Ask a question. Say yes.
I've actually never seen you heckling the Prime Minister.
Ask Minister
I've never seen you heckling the Prime Minister. Look, bottom line is this.
I'm going to take some questions at the end of the statement.
Yes, I'll be taking 2 questions at the very end. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So I'm going to start my statement again, and hopefully this time without interruption from the Liberal heckling gathering here, and we'll speak directly to Canadians so that they can hear what the new Leader of the Opposition has to say. I'll begin again.
So, yeah, what was that about? Anyway, the other problem that day, apparently, is that David Akin also told the comms guy for Pierre Poilievre to tell Pierre Poilievre to go F himself. And that was confirmed by Anthony, I don't know if it's pronounced Coach or Koch, or Koch even, it's Koch, who is the comms guy for Pierre Poilievre. So, wow, I mean, do we need to do one of these big national interventions about how mean everybody is, and poor Chrystia Freeland, and poor Jagmeet Singh, and, you know, I mean, really. And then here's the news media doing it to Pierre Poilievre. The very same ones who bitch and moan when other people, other politicians are yelled at, but and there they are yelling. So I don't want to play this game. I mean, it's a ridiculous game, and it's just really a little bit of fun. But I don't know how legacy media thinks they appear when they really go to town on Pierre Poilievre. He's a brand new leader of the party. They usually get like a honeymoon period of a couple days too, or like a couple minutes. And they just hate him. You know, the legacy media don't like this guy, and they're not even hiding it. And that could have been Jim Acosta, who made a complete ass out of himself covering Trump, got 88 things wrong, and was grandstanding. You know, I mean, I think media should be aggressive. I wish they'd done that to Theresa Tam. Hey, where's the data for the lockdowns? Where's the data for the vaccines? Hey, why didn't they stop that news conference? But they don't. You know, they go after the people that they don't agree with, and everybody else gets a pass. So I don't mean him personally. I don't actually know very much about this guy as a reporter. But, yeah, that was inappropriate. But no one's going to die either. So I'm going to end with something about Queen Elizabeth II, who I'm kind of obsessed with. And that is, I did see a piece that, in a sense, reflected, I'm just pulling it up here if you hear rattling papers. I did read a piece that kind of sums up my feelings, right? Like, I am a bit of a monarchist. As I said last week, I grew up listening to the Queen and singing, watching the Queen and singing God Save the Queen in school. And I loved the idea that somewhere in the back of my mind, this distinguished person was always kind of in the background. She was always there, you know? And the traditions were there. And the dignity was there. I mean, that's one thing you can say about her. You can say many good things about her, but that was one of the things, especially in a culture where everybody's always complaining, including her grandson, about how hard his life is. You know, she never did that. So I'm sad to see her go. And I think that the pomp and circumstance and the traditions around the funeral that they're doing over the 10 days is absolutely magnificent. It's mind-boggling and beautiful and lovely, and it's wonderful to see all the Brits lining the streets. Regardless of what you think about the Queen, it's an institution that has, for the 70 years she was head of it, really distinguished itself in many, many wonderful ways. So that's what I think about that. But I'm not necessarily happy about where it's going. A chap named Brendan O'Neill, who's the chief political writer for Spiked, said what I've been thinking about what's going to happen now that the Queen is gone. Here's what he says. Our new king, Charles III, seems keen to engage with his subjects as expressors of pollutants who must be encouraged to modify their behaviors. Infamous for his neo-pagan beliefs, for his conviction that sacred nature is threatened by the industrious exploits of mankind, Charles III has most commonly connected with the public through the issue of climate change. He has slammed our human economies that operate in isolation from the wider economy of nature. That's a quote. Too many people, now his subjects, have been incredibly wasteful, he says. They take resources, make products, use them, and often dispose of waste to the land. Charles looks set to be king, who views us as something lower than subjects, almost as contaminants, whose daily behavior is bringing about a climate catastrophe. Again, I would rather doff a cap to Elizabeth than subject my behavior, subject being the operative word, to the scrutiny of a king convinced that I am reckless simply for existing. So this is very interesting. And that's true about Charles, right? He's a globalist. This is what this guy's getting at. I'm skipping ahead. But there is something else, something that worries me even more about the end of the Elizabethan age. The truth is that being a subject of the Queen wasn't only ceremonial. It wasn't just an ornamental hangover from a long-gone era of defense and enigma. There was substance in it, too. The Queen embodied historical consciousness. She was history made flesh. She was one of the few individuals in public life, perhaps the only one, conscious of herself as a figure of history, conscious of herself as someone made by the past, symbolic in the present, and preparing heirs for the future. She was arguably this country's final thread to its past. That is what I will miss about being a subject of the Queen. That sense that I do not only exist in a Groundhog Day of presentism in which now is all that matters, but that I also belong to a nation shaped by historical events, achievements, and conflicts. Post-Elizabeth, I fear we will lose our connection with the past, and I fear people have not yet clocked just how socially destructive such a development would be. Bravo. I completely agree with that. That is what I am worried about with the death of Queen Elizabeth II and the ascension to the throne of Charles III. I'm sure he's a perfectly nice guy, but he's a globalist. And so is William. William is doing the Earthshot Prize. He's coming over to North America with Kate for a visit to endorse the Earthshot Prize, and guess who he's been consulting with about it? I mean, this really, Bill Gates, right? It's like, oh, it's a tin ear, dudes. Like these guys, you're already in trouble when you're a monarch. You can't swan around with these people from the World Economic Forum and then expect people to think you have the common touch. You cannot do it. He must not do it. His advisors are insane for allowing him to jump on that bandwagon. I'm talking about William, who I thought there might be some hope for, but doubtful. Anyway, my last point is that as I was watching, I'm recording this on Thursday, and there was a lovely funeral cortege going through London with people lined up and the Queen's casket being drawn along, and I heard somebody say that one of the bands was playing muffled drums, and I remembered that phrase, but I could not remember where it was from, and so I Googled around and I discovered that that phrase is from one of my favorite poems called Funeral Blues, also known as Stop All the Clocks by W.H. Auden. Now, listen, I didn't even know about this poem until I saw 4 Weddings and a Funeral, but it knocked me over. And this is the reference here, and I'll explain what the reference means. Stop all the clocks, cut off the telephone, prevent the dog from barking with a juicy bone. Silence the pianos, and with muffled drum, bring out the coffin, let the mourners come. So I researched muffled drum, and what it means is that in these funeral processions, and it actually happened in the John F. Kennedy one, which was brilliantly stage managed by Jackie, who I think she modeled it after Lincoln's, after one of the early president's funerals. Anyway, beautiful riderless horse and the whole deal. They actually have an explanation of what that means, and they do find a way to muffle the drum so it has a particularly funereal sound. That is the ritual around these kinds of funerals. So a little bit of trivia for you. And the Queen's funeral is on Monday. I'm going to be glued to it and all the dynamics around, I won't even say their names, but they've been hogging all the headlines. I don't even think they should be there after what they've done. But anyway, I think the Queen probably wanted them there, so I'll be quiet. But I'm going to be watching a funeral on Monday. And I hope you guys have a really good weekend this weekend. Lots going on in our lives, right? This is a big show. Like, I want you to take in what these fine people are alerting us to and what it actually represents. So do think about Ritchie and Helen. And I will say to you, stay critical, and I will see you.